Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Q2 Market Intelligence webinar. Great to have you with us today. We hope you enjoyed some relaxing days and were not impacted by the many wildfires in Europe. The continent has been enduring this summer. So we at Solar Power Europe obviously also enjoyed a nice summer. Europe is very empty from mid-July to end of August. Nevertheless, at least those who were in the offices were quite productive. We had, and maybe some of you were there, co-organized, among other things, for the first time, our a battery business development forum in Frankfurt, which attracted 450 people. So batteries are really hot these days. We also launched a European battery platform, which is open to members. So if you're interested, please join. More on that later. And if you have any questions, please get in touch. So wait, I'm just just a few words on what we saw in the last few months in the market. So I think maybe most of you have seen that. Please check out our latest report. Jonathan, one of my colleagues, who was a major writer of this report, will also refer to that. But I think this is another highlight and will turn probably also into a flagship report, a smaller one. So while you all know, we publish the EMO once a year, always in December. We just felt that so much is happening, and we would like to not only publish the information on Europe as part of the global market outlook, but we would like to do that also in a dedicated publication. And that's why we came out with this EU market outlook for solar power mid-year analysis. And it was actually great. So we got quite some response also in the media. Although the outlook has somewhat gotten worse, so content-wise not so great, but I think it's very informative, and this is also what we share with you, and you will also get some more information on this later. Okay, so maybe another few takeaways from the last few weeks. So I think what was very important, and that's the good news among all these challenges that we're seeing, that is that solar has become, in June, the largest source of EU electricity for the first time. Solar share reached, as you can see on the slide, 22.1%. That's based on over 45 terawatt hours. And it also meant that we were leaving nuclear for the first time behind. So that's quite remarkable. It meant also that solar output increased in June more than 22% year on year, and which also indicates actually how hot this month was. Another important occurrence was that the heat waves has boosted solar PV capture rates. While in recent times it went the other way, more solar meant depressing solar prices, solar value, capture prices. I think here the heat wave actually triggered something else. So because there was so much cooling demand and reduced alternative generation, I think it was as crazy as you couldn't ship enough coal on the Rhine River in Germany, so that the coal power plants couldn't get more supply. And in France, they also to watch out actually on increasing thermal capacity, because that would have triggered more cooling, which in return would have increased temperature. in rivers, which wouldn't have worked with the nature. And so there were quite some things going on that yeah, provided a short-term relief in terms of the value of solar power. Um, and third, I think that was also very interesting because it affects all of the industry, and that's product prices. So while we've seen in recent months, and these are Chinese prices, polysilicon prices increasing by almost 25%. Wafer prices also going up a little bit, and depending on what kind of cells you were looking for, more TOPCon, I feel, because that's mostly in the market. Cell prices also increased a little bit, but what did not increase and is almost set in stone, that module prices remained basically at record lows. You probably also read about that. There was recently another meeting in China, high level, with policy leaders and leading companies, also off-takers. So utilities were taking part in this meeting, and really these leaders try hard to fix what's really a problem for manufacturers in China, as you can also see in recent quarterly results. So it will be interesting to see um, if, uh, if 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 they can get module prices up. But what speaks obviously against that is simply overcapacities are there on the one hand, and the Chinese market design has changed as of June. So that means you could also see that in recent publications on installations in China, that demand has decreased dramatically in the last weeks. So that means on the one hand, demand is slow in China. So yeah, so we'll see if policymakers are able to turn here the tide, but it doesn't look like at the moment, at least. Okay, let's briefly look at little bit at our house rules. Just a quick disclaimer. So this webinar is just for you, our members of Solar Power Europe. And we ask you, please, therefore, not to share any screenshots of the slides on social media. Nevertheless, you will get the presentation and also the recording later on. Let's have a brief look at the agenda. We have roughly 90 minutes, now 80 minutes left today. We will start with a market update from my colleague Jonathan. Then another colleague, Arthur, will give an update on latest policy developments. As usual, we have invited three guests. First, the consultancy market research firm. So we have with us Ali Afra, the data whiz of EUPD Research, who will simply share his view on how the European market is developing these days. And we look, as usual, also in two markets, one big market and one smaller market. This time we have with us Salomé Durand, who's responsible for solar at the French Renewables Association, CER. And we have with us Jan Krčma, who is the director of the Czech Solar Association. And after the presentations, we will have still some time left for a panel discussion with the Q&A. So all of us will be on the panel, which I will moderate. Feel free to ask your questions. Please write it into the Q&A. And yeah, we will get some order into the questions if you even ask them somewhat before and prepare the answers. In any case, you can always raise a question and we will try to answer. Okay, without further ado, let's start. Jonathan Gormans, market analyst in my market intel team, will give you an update on the market updates, and will also share again some of the content from our midterm report, which was basically mostly written by him. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, so this mid-year report, that's what we've been working on in July. We've looked at the latest results for European markets, and we've tried to adjust our estimate. And we came to the conclusion that basically our forecast from our global market outlook in the beginning of the year was too ambitious, and that the market is slowing down more than we expected, which led us to go to a market size of 64.2 gigawatts for 2025. The high and the low scenario depend a little bit. So you can see in the purple, the medium scenario, in the green, high, and in the red, the low scenario for 25. It's a small margin that we're playing with. So we truly think this 64.2 gigawatt is the forecast for the year, which means that at the current pace, we will see a decrease in 2025. So for the first time in nearly a decade, we see a decreasing market in the EU. But also, at the current pace, we will not reach the Repower EU target of 750 gigawatts DC, which was set during the Repower EU decision. This is based on a 125 DC to AC ratio. What is important here is that the ambition needs to be increased, and that the current market is slowing down. The main reason for this market slowdown is the residential segment, as many of you will be aware of. We also see a slowdown in the small commercial segment in the EU market. Why is this a big deal for us and for the solar industry in general? We took a look at all our previous European market outlooks, so all our previous EMOs. And looking at those, it's the first time in a long time that we overestimated basically the installations for 2025, and we have gradually lowered them. So this is the first time that this trend is happening. We've always notoriously underestimated the solar market because, as many of you will know, the solar market is the easiest market to underestimate. This in 2025 was turned upside down. So compared to the global market outlook we released earlier this year, we still lowered it by 2.4%. Noticing the slowdown in the distributed segment specifically. This graph shows it nicely. So we split it between residential, C&I, and utility. Looking at annual installations, you can see that utility will take a 50% share. And this is mainly due to a drop in the share of residential PV, which we define as below 10 kilowatts. It has basically halved in both absolute and relative terms from the 2023 peak that we saw. Utility scale is taking on more of a role, and small commercial and residential installations are slowing down. Why is this happening, and in which countries is it happening? We took a look at the latest figures for the major markets, and it will explain it for the major market, the top 6, which covers nearly above 60% of all installations in the EU. Starting, of course, with the biggest, which is Germany. So our latest report forecasts 16.9 gigawatts for this year, which is a 2.5% decrease compared to 2024. And if you look at the latest Q2, taking into account that the data is always an underestimation, so it's always at least like the previous month is always updated with around 25%, still we see a big decrease, especially if you look at the industrial segment and the commercial segment. What is cool to see is that even though it's an underestimation, this latest quarter, we can already spot an increase in the residential segment. So the question remains, is this a bottoming out? Is this something temporary? That's something we'll have to monitor. And this is for sure then also linked to the plugin systems, which are becoming more and more relevant in Germany. Still, I want to highlight that the trend that we see in 2025, so this 2.5% decrease in installations forecasted, is not due to latency in registrations. What I did in this graph was basically take the reported data of July 2024 and compare it with the reported data of July 2025. And you see Q1 in July, Q1 shows roughly the same for 25-24, but Q2 at the same point in time, 2025 installations are significantly lower. Looking at it today, so correcting it for what is registered today in this same periods, you have to adjust it by quite a lot. So this is what we mean when we say the German installations are always an underestimation. We were 20% higher in registrations today compared to how they were originally reported in July 2024. So that's just to give an idea. It's not due to latency of registered data. There's more behind it. There's a general slowdown behind it. Spanish market then, the second biggest market, we can always look at the utility scale figures from the TSO. And here we see that August is particularly strong. So even though the month has not ended, the data is always reported late, much like the German data. August is already showing a very big peak, and we believe that at the current pace, this might even exceed the peak of July. So this supports our argument that we see a slight growth in the utility scale segment to 7.6 gigawatts. So that's 2% more than we saw in 2024. Again, this data for 2025 is very incomplete. So you have to account for upwards corrections, but still you see that many of the bars are exceeding those of the same periods last year. Italian markets then, in the smaller scales, this data is as it is, so it's reported with latency, but it's not corrected in the future. The residential and the CNI segment you see is maybe reaching a bottom, this residential and small commercial segment, but that's for the second time in a row that we have this plateauing data. CNI continues to drop a little bit, and utility scale took another big hit, leading to a 13% decrease quarter on quarter. Given that the data is typically seasonal and the installations as well, the 6 gigawatt we forecast in the mid-year report is attainable at the current pace. Here again, this comparison on quarter to quarter, this time just with the final data, not with the registrations as in Germany. We see this decrease is bigger in Q2 than it was in Q1, relatively speaking. The French market then, Salome will give lots of details on it, so I won't go too deep into it, but we see very positive results for the first 2 quarters. So we are going 1.4 gigawatt per quarter, which is more than a third increase in Q1 and 30% in Q2. At this pace, we will see a very big French market, but there is uncertainty, of course, and Salome will go into it. Why is there uncertainty? Because as you can see in this slide, there is an obvious leader of this growth in the French market, which is the commercial segment. Contrary to other European countries, this commercial segment, specifically from 100 to 250 kilowatts connections, is growing a lot. Okay, this quarter -8%, so that might be an initial reaction to the tumultuous environment. But at the current forecast, at the current pace that we saw in these first 2 quarters, the 4.7 gigawatt that we forecast for the year is easily reached. The question now is, and we believe that it will somewhat slow down. The question now is, what gives the second half? And that's why I'm very excited that we have Salome here with us today to give us some insights on that. Other than that, utility had notable growth in Q2, looking quarter to quarter. Another of our top markets is the Polish markets. After more than a 10% decrease in 2024, now we see that the second quarter is the same as the first quarter in installed capacity, but that means a 20% decrease from the same period last year. At the current installation pace, the forecasted 3.5 gigawatts that we have in our latest report seems attainable because we count on the second half being stronger. For the rooftop market, then you see the red part, these micro installations below 51 kilowatt. There is a very minor increase in Q2. So here again is the question, as with many markets we've seen before, will this be a bottoming out? I mean, we have to monitor it. You see some seasonality, Q1, Q2, 2024. So that might also be the reason for this. But it's at least something positive to see in the second quarter. CNI then contracts further, so above 50 to a megawatt. And then utility scale looks as if it's grown a little bit in Q2, which it has quarter on quarter. But looking at the same period last year, it's 8% lower. So this 3.5 gigawatts seems feasible, but we have to count on a second half of the year being stronger. Then we go to the market which saw the biggest decrease in rooftop installations from the EU in absolute terms, which is the Netherlands. So the peak that we saw in 2023 in rooftop installations in the Netherlands is nowhere near the level that we are at now. Today, even below 15 kilowatt systems are decreasing still, the connections for these systems. But for the first time in a very long time, in 1 year plus, we see a little bit of an increase in this above 15 kilowatt segment, meaning there might be some more interest from companies, but this is something that we have to monitor as well. So I hope with just sharing the image of these 6 biggest markets, that it becomes clear that we have to really keep our finger on the pulse for these rooftop markets, because they set the pace of growth in the EU at the moment. The utility scale installations, on the other hand, they drive forward, boosted by big auctions from the past. But this residential and small commercial market in particular is having some interesting developments. Then I've highlighted 5 other markets which, sourcing from PV Magazine and other online sources, have released some form of data. This is AC, DC, mixed through. What matters here is for Romania and for Portugal, you can argue the data is positive. So Romania has more than half the installations of 2024 reached in the first half of 2025 already, while there is seasonality to it. So that's a very healthy and good sign for that market. Portugal also by May already had half a gigawatt, which is a nice pace compared to 2024. But then the 3 last ones that we highlight are slowing down, relatively speaking. A lot depends on these very big systems that can still come online, of course. I would now like to go into what drives these changes. And what drives it, I usually talk about the top 6 markets. So I'll do the same for June, July, and August here. Very briefly going through it, and please do a Q&A question if you want to deep dive into one of these bullet points. In Germany, in June, there was a standard introduced for the plug-in solar devices. So these become increasingly more popular. they put a standard down, and we expect a final product standard for so-called balcony PV to be released in Q3. So in this quarter still. Then we had loads of tenders in Germany. One solar plus storage tender, which had a much lower price points on average than the previous round. One rooftop PV tender, which had a little bit of a higher price point. And then one utility scale tender, which was also a little bit higher, but still highly competitive. So below this 5 cents per kilowatt hour for 2.27 gigawatts. That's a lot of future installations. Another point I want to highlight for Germany, in July, there was this court case that was discussing the charges for batteries. And there was an outcome of this court case basically saying that DSOs can still grant capacity-based grid connection fees for battery storage. The argumentation behind the ruling is that it helps avoid overbuilding and it shields consumers from excess system costs. So do with that explanation as you want, but it was for some negative news in July. Spain, then, a lot of these purple regulatory auction bullet points. There was a more ambition for the interconnection between France and Spain, especially following the blackout, of course, in April. And there was a law approved to promote energy storage and flexibility. This was mainly related to the permitting speed for both. Then in July, we had access opened for over 3.5 gigawatts of grid capacity. This is the first time they do this, and it's located at major industrial development sites, so where future electricity demand will be very big. Then we had this grid reform law rejected. That was a package that had measures to fast-track storage and flexibility and grid oversight following the blackout. So the government now needs to rework it, and we have to keep an eye on it, of course. Then we had nearly $500 million allocated for clean tech manufacturing, which will boost some solar manufacturing as well. In Italy, then, in June, this construction deadline for agri-PV was extended, which was a major regulatory auction. And then in July, we had nearly 200 million for renewable energy in SMEs, amongst which mostly solar. And also this FairX auctions attracting 17.5 gigawatts of proposals for solar energy. So that shows the magnitude of this system, the support system that they want to develop. And then nearly 650 megawatts of battery projects approved. And we have a new manufacturer saying basically they want to do something by 2026, a tandem solar manufacturing line. Less news from Poland, where the only thing I really want to highlight in July is that they awarded 1.6 gigawatts in a tender. France, then, again, favorite market of the year. A lot is going on there, and I'm very curious for the second half. What we as Solar Power Europe, and I think everyone in the solar sector active in France, was very happy about was that this proposal for solar and wind moratorium was rejected. So that was a real scare, and undoubtedly Serge and Salome have done a great job there. In the same month, a bit unnoticed, the spot markets also switched to 15-minute intervals according to the EU rules. We have new feed-in tariff rates for the below 500 kilowatts systems. And then a major EPC and installer went bankrupt in July. And in August, there were bidding rules for commercial PV tenders. Here, this commercial PV tender, to summarize it, the ambition is much lower. And the plan to tender off capacities is also much lower. So that's a somewhat negative development. In the Netherlands, then, to finish this segment off, there was a nice news point of the first vehicle to grid car sharing project in Utrecht, which is something of 500 vehicles from Renault, which will interact with the grid. Then we had results from the SDE++ program of 2024, so also capacities granted there. And there is some debate on residential heating plus PV under the EPBD 4. Okay, now module prices, as Michael says, have barely moved, and that's on the global scale, but also European wholesale prices for modules are still at this January 2025 level for all categories, low cost modules. So modules that are really like old PERC modules, they are of course continuously decreasing, but the other categories have been at the same level in the past month. That's on the European wholesale market. Two things I want to highlight shortly from the report as well. So if you want further details on it, please go read it or ask a question in the Q&A. Is auctions and PPAs, two drivers of our new market segment that is leading, which is the utility scale. So auction volumes, we finalized our 2024 numbers, and this is just to go back into time and again pitch this need for clear auction rules that are future-proof for both rooftop and ground-mounted auctions. You see, in 2022, auctions were not there. The design was not well enough to attract the capacities. But today, it's attracting record volumes, and especially in Germany, the overbidding is also, so it's highly competitive. You have low price points at which these auctions are completed. And in 2024, we now have the final figure, which is somewhere around 20 gigawatts for both ground-mounted and rooftop in the EU. More recent is our research on PPAs. So here there is, in black, you see the cumulative number, and 2 points are highlighted there. So the contracted capacity in 2020 was barely 2.3 gigawatts. And in June of 2025, we went to 23 gigawatts. So in cumulative contracted capacities under PPAs, which shows how important this is as a route to market. When you then compare Q1 in red to Q2 in purple, you see there is a slowdown going on for solar PPAs. And not a small slowdown. In Q2, quarter on quarter, we see a 60% slowdown in PPAs. And this is from what we hear from the industry, because of a mismatch between buyer expectancy and or buyer hesitancy, because they expect prices to continue going down, and seller expectations of locked-in price. So it's a mismatch of the market, and it's to the degree of minus 60% in Q2. That's a warning signal, and we all saw how important this utility scale segment is becoming for EU PV development. So that's something we also have to closely monitor and have to call on policymakers for. Now, that's it on the EU27 market. If you have questions, again, put them in the Q&A and take a look at our latest mid-year report. Now I want to give the room to Arthur, my colleague, Senior Policy Advisor at Solar Power Europe. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. And hi, everybody. So yes, I will give policy updates for the EU level. So this is going to be a wide-ranging view of the files that Solar Power Europe has kept an eye on in the last couple months. I will give so this is the agenda that I'm going to present, going from more the political news at the EU level, so the political direction that we're seeing the EU take in this first year of the mandate, going into more the policy files that we're looking at and steering as well, and also looking at what we've been publishing to steer them in the right direction, and what's next for this year and beginning of 2026. So in terms of political updates, I'll go from the EU Council, so the energy ministers, and then the European Parliament. In the European Council, ministers took a long time to negotiate some council conclusions on energy security. This was a big priority of the Polish presidency of the council, and they took 6 months to negotiate those conclusions. Solar Power Europe and members and associations wrote together a joint letter to call for ministers to include in our energy security strategy the benefits of renewables and flexibility, to include support for clean tech manufacturing, for European clean tech manufacturing, as well as to develop industry-specific cybersecurity control and standards in the EU. We thought those were the most important points that the EU could take for its energy security strategy. As a result, they published conclusions on the 16th of June, which go broadly in the right direction, although it lacks a lot of details. Of course, this is just conclusions of the Council, which are supposed to be just political guidelines for the European Commission to take on and write up its next action with. So overall, the narrative is good. It calls for acceleration of clean energy, storage, and flexibility, which is pretty new in the sense that it's rarely present in energy security strategies. It's usually bound in a decarbonization text. So this is already advancing somewhat. It calls for strengthening our clean tech manufacturing inside Europe, calls for assessing the financing needs for current and new energy infrastructure, including flexible energy infrastructure, as well as strengthening our cybersecurity architecture. So going overall in the right direction there. In the European Parliament this time, it has worked on a lot of texts, but mostly expecting and anticipating the actual legislative proposals of the European Commission. The Parliament did not wait. It rather wrote its own reports, so a resolution on the Clean Industrial Deal, and then own initiative report on grids. So none of these texts are legislative texts, but they call on the Commission for actions generally in broad terms. So the Clean Industrial Deal resolution called for two very important things in our mind. First one is an EU strategy on energy flexibility with a focus on demand response and storage. This is exactly what we've also been asking the Commission to do, as well as a second thing, which is an action plan for clean tech manufacturing with funding for that. So that would include solar manufacturing as well as other tools. The second thing is the report on grids. So again, it calls on the Commission to have a strategy for reducing the dispatch down of renewable electricity. So pretty similar to the flexibility idea before. The second thing is it calls on the Commission to move away from the first come first serve basis for assessing grid connection. And that is something overall the renewables industry is looking forward to as well. So that means the Commission, along with member states, would have to introduce transparent priority connection criteria instead of just first come first serve. A third thing is that the national regulatory authorities would need to promote tariffs that incentivize flexible consumption. That's something also the Commission has been working on. And finally, it's calling for more funding for grids, including distribution grids, which is also something Solar Power Europe has been asking. So overall, The Parliament, again, has been writing broad text, political text, that asks the Commission to go in the right direction, at least for renewables and flexibility. Now, going more into the policy files themselves, one very important one for the renewables and solar industry is that the Commission published the Clean Industrial Deal State-Aid Framework, the CSAF we call it. And what it is a state-aid framework to accelerate some kind of state aid, right? So the climate and energy state-aid framework is still active and it has not changed. This comes in addition to it. It lists some kinds of aid where member states will have an accelerated procedure. This was already present in the form of a TCTF in the last couple of years. This is being replaced by the CSAF. So it does not say what a state aid can be. It says if you're doing a state aid like this, it can be accelerated according to a procedure that is new. So the few things that it will accelerate will be measures to accelerate the rollout of clean energy, including solar, measures for decarbonizing industry, and measures for accelerating clean tech manufacturing. So 3 very important files for us. So the first one is for accelerating rollout of clean energy. There's a lot of things in those files, and I'm just going to highlight a couple ones. It does not say, I mean, feed-in premiums can still be considered. This was a bit in the discussion. Beneficiaries must not receive aid for production during negative hours. I highlight the word production here because in terms of negative prices, there can still be some kind of incentive, but maybe some incentive to not produce or to store rather than to produce at negative hours. Another thing is below, measures providing support for electricity costs for energy intensive users. So this is a second type of aid where it's going to be accelerated. So this is for heavy industry that is very electro intensive or energy intensive. This allows for member states to provide support for their energy costs, but only in emergency. So this is going to be for 3 years maximum with a lot of conditions. So this is perfectly understandable in our minds. The third thing is industrial decarbonization. So there we had a lot of hopes that support schemes could be accelerated for electrifying industrial processes. It is indeed there, although not as prioritized that we would like, but still electrification for low and mid temperature processes, so below 500 degrees are eligible, and this is good. It means that those kind of aids will be accelerated. Fossil fuels by default is there. So natural gas can be supported, but only if it's as a transition and if there's a clear phase-out plan. Sorry. Lastly, I mentioned that it will support aid for clean tech manufacturing, although this is very, very disappointing in the way that it's been phrased in this new state aid framework, because it brings very few changes, and basically it's still very, very complicated, or even impossible under the state aid framework to really support operational expenditures for your project. So it still remains very much focused on CapEx, on investment, which is still an issue. The European Commission also published on the 2nd of July a very important text, along with a few guidances at the same time. So it published the 2040 climate target. So it confirms what we thought. The EU will aim for minus 90% GHG emission by 2040. Very important text for putting a target out there for also our business. And along with it, it produced a lot of guidance documents for member states mostly. And the way it put it together is that it's guidance documents aimed at facilitating our path to climate targets. Those 3 documents are the ones below. So one for adapting network charges for reduced energy system costs and embracing flexibility. The second one is for establishing grid and storage areas for permitting. And the third one is on innovative forms of renewables. So there's a lot more information on our website, and we've sent information to members generally, but feel free to get in touch with us if you're interested in those topics. Another topic I wanted to mention very quickly is that we now have a proposal, a legislative proposal for the next EU long-term budget. So that's for 2028 and 2030 to 2034, sorry. So the next 7-year budget of the EU. In July, the European Commission presented its proposal, and as you can see on the screen, it's got a new structure overall with 3 main pillars. You see, the first one is for supporting member states and regions. So what it does is that it groups together the common agricultural policy with the regional and cohesion policy into one big funding pot worth 1 trillion. The second big pillar is for supporting businesses. This is a new structure as well, where in there the main thing is that there's going to be a European competitiveness fund, absorbing Horizon Europe and other things, and overall is going to be worth 450 billion euros over 7 years. This is where most of the investments for, or the EU funds for our sector is going to be located. So it's really important for us to understand how this is going to be structured, what priorities are going to be there, what are going to be the rules for funding. It's going to be for setting a new solar factory, as well as deployment projects or grids, or anything and related to it. So this is where it's most important for us. There's got more money into the Connecting Europe facility, which is money for EU electricity grids. So that's also really important. The third pillar is Global Europe, and that's a bit similar to what exists today. It's mostly aid to third countries. So overall, it brings as a proposal, it brings the EU budget at 2 trillion euros, which is a record, but that's accounting for inflation and repaying Next Generation EU loan that we took until now. This is a bit more information on the European Competitiveness Fund. So again, this is the most important fund for us. What's interesting is that the Commission wants to simplify funding for the next term, saying that there will be a single rule book for an entire fund, whereas before it was one big fund, and then there's going to be calls with very different rules each time. And here, what is good is that it should be more simple. There's even a competitiveness seal, in the sense that even if you don't get funding for one particular call, you still get sort of a stamp from the Commission because you're a good project, and then you can get funding somewhere else. However, the scope is still very broad, and it lists a lot of different priorities. It includes all of the good priorities that we've been calling for. So renewables, distribution, skills for the transition, electrification, storage, demand response, clean tech manufacturing, everything is in there, but along with other things as well. And it's very difficult for now to get a good picture and a predictable picture of where this money is going to go exactly in the next 7 years. So this is just a legislative proposal from the European Commission to be debated and negotiated with Parliament and Council still. So it's going to take a couple of years. Right, so this is a picture that I showed even last time at the quarterly webinar, but this is just us following how the Clean Industrial Deal is unfolding, the big strategy of the Commission. So those texts with the tick are the ones that have been out there already. The one with the sand is where we're patiently waiting for the texts. As you can see on the left, big legislative texts upcoming are mostly on industrial decarbonization, on grids, and on energy security. So those are the big revisions or new frameworks that we're expecting with a big impact. And Solar Power Europe is working on them. So again, feel free to get in touch with us if you want to discuss that, as well as other strategies that you can see on the right side, notably the one on electrification that should come next year, I believe. Finally, a couple publications that we made, I think is important to highlight, is mostly related to implementation of existing EU law. So the solar standard, for example, stemming from the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, we've made recommendations to member states on how to implement them. It's really important that every member state implements this law. So on every new building, being commercial, public, or residential, there is PV installed. And the last point is our state of play report on the Renewable Energy Directive. So this is, again, a really important EU law that needs to be implemented as fast as possible because it should accelerate permitting in every member state. This is the state of play, so you get a picture on the screen of how much every member state has transposed every rule for accelerating permitting. This is very disappointing for the moment, so it's really important to get that picture out there, that there's a lot still to be made, going from not transposed at all to transposed but not really effective yet, to even it's in the rule book but it's not helping at all, to the point where it's fully transposed. But you see that it's still pretty rare that it's fully transposed in member state law and effective on the ground. So there's still a lot of work to be done. That's why we're still publishing documents like this and communicating about it. That's it for me. I'll give the floor to Ali, and I'll be very open to answering any question you have on the Q&A. I know I talked about a lot of topics.
Okay, thank you very much, Arthur, for the nice presentation. So my name is Ali from EUPD Research. First and foremost, thank you very much, EUPD Research team, for the invite. Always learn, and I hope I can contribute a little bit too. So in the next 10 minutes, I will be talking a little bit about the European Union solar sector, and also a little bit about installer insights in Europe's biggest PV market, Germany. Now, it starts with the PV insights, but a little bit of caveat is some markets. Oops, this P9 is again it's a little the format is a little mixed, but sorry for that. Some parts of the PV market is covered already by Jonathan, so I will try to just So I'll try to touch upon these markets briefly. I will briefly add to what Jonathan already mentioned, which I thought must be added. He couldn't put that in his round. I'll try to touch upon that as well. And then I will talk a little bit about installers' insights in Germany, which is also important. Now, about the European Union's annual PV installations, as you can see, from 65 gigawatts, we are around 64 gigawatt this year. It's also very heartwarming to see that the forecast that we are having for 2025 is overlapping very nicely, or is matching our colleagues in Solar Power Europe. Multiple reasons are leading to that on a macro level: geopolitical conditions, module, as well as electricity prices, and of course, residential PV decline are the top reasons for that. And you see that the top 10 EU markets are expected to install 53 gigawatts, or 83% of the market in 2025. What I found out was also 14 of these markets will be in the gigawatt club. Could be higher. Let's see what happens, because usually there is a small thin line in there to pass the threshold, but so far it's been 14 markets. Now, the top 10 markets, you see Germany, again, as Jonathan mentioned, there is a decline there. Spain is more or less stable. Italy, there is a decline. France, in the first half, doing very well, 2.8 gigawatt installed. Again, as Jonathan mentioned, with the highest installations in the commercial range. And then Greece is having a decent increase in 2025. And as you can see in the text, there are 3 markets that are having very high increases, or expected to have high year-on-year growth, are Denmark, Finland, and Greece. Greece is one of them. Very promising market with regard to both PV and storage. Again, Poland is declining. Romania is increasing. And another market that I would like to talk about here is also Hungary, which is going to have a small increase based on our analysis from 1.2 gigawatt last year. Hungary is expected to install about 1.3 plus 1.3 gigawatt by the end of the year. Of course, mainly because of the Solar Plus program in the country, and also some high large scale projects. Yeah, and then important for this overview was the per capita installations. As you can see here, of course, the Netherlands is top on this table, in Germany, but you see by the end of 2025, there are other markets who are joining the rank: Estonia, Greece, Luxembourg. And again, Hungary, you can see Hungary is closing the gap. But I expect next year, most probably, it will be a kilowatt per capita. It will join the kilowatt per capita club. And this was also very interesting. We usually, when we describe these markets, we usually talk about gigawatt club markets, but it's also good to talk about the kilowatt per capita club markets. And you can see them, 9 of them in Europe are the kilowatt per capita clubs. Again, another important development is the segmental balancing that is happening. You see 2024, the decline, well, the 29% in the residential. There you see the decline in 2025 to 26% in the residential segment. And you see the increase in the utility, and of course the CNI is more or less stable, could also increase. But the important message here is that when compared to 2023, the CNI is increasing. It's important for different stakeholders to keep in mind that this obviously creates all sorts of different risk mitigation measures, right? Obviously, a 10 kilowatt system is totally different from a larger CNI segment, a CNI system, and of course, it needs all sorts of new strategies. We are also working on that to be able to help different companies to unfold basically their this or this potential in this segment further and further, more and more. Now, there's also this half year, first half and second half of 2025 comparison in the residential. And again, you see Germany, this is what Jonathan also touched upon, Germany 6.4 gigawatt in the residential. Keep in mind, I'm talking about residential segment up to 20 kilowatt systems. This is without balcony PV system. So another close to 1 gigawatt of balcony PV is expected in Germany by the end of the year as well. In only the first half of 2025, 238,000 plug-in PV systems have been installed in Germany, right? And this is, of course, a phenomenon we are seeing in other markets as well, right? Poland, Belgium, and other markets. But in general, and as you can see here, there is a decline, and for all the reasons that colleagues discussed. Now, important here is the installer insights. Well, obviously, Germany is chosen here because it's plus 25% of all the installations last year. But then you see here, when we asked plus 370 German installers about the expected changes in the installed capacity in 2024 and 5, the responses were mixed, right? So 30% expected the decline, 33% expected the growth, which is more or less basically in line with the data, right? So the data is more that the German market is having decline, but it's not a lot. The market is still stable. And Important here is that 7% the decline in the residential segment, but you notice that the 7% in the growth is also growth in the CNI segment. That's exactly what we also described, and the installers can also see that, right? Get the market's pulse. You see here 18% of the total installers mentioned that the price dynamics, again important, Michael touched upon that, is impacting them negatively. 22% very interestingly said it's impacting them positively. So when we ask them, how did falling prices positively impact your business? You see 66% of the German installers, right? And again, in parentheses, these are residential and CNI installers. They mentioned they were able to attract more customers to increase their gains. They also said they had better margins in their existing projects, and 36% said that once we attracted the clients to come for PV, we were able to increase our gains in other technologies, storage, HEMS, and others, right? We also noticed that the installers are learning from the market developments, right? They are diversifying their portfolio, not just with regard to brand, but also technology. More storage, more HEMS, more heat pumps is in their portfolio. And you can also see that as well. So this is cushioning the impact of the PV price dynamics for some installers. But this is important also, that when we ask them how did falling prices negatively impact your business, very important to see here that 79% said that it was difficult to justify premium services to the clients and customers, right? Because they always expected lower price. So if you are a stakeholder in the German market and you have a premium price, it's very, very important for you to know that it might be difficult for the installers to justify the high price of your products to the end customers. The second important reason was that they saw a lot of competition in there, and this competition led to lower prices and less margins. Now, on that note, I think I have reached the end of this 10 minutes. If you had any further questions, of course, I'll be there during the Q&A session. Any more questions, please feel free to write to me, and I would be more than happy to respond. Thanks for your attention. On that note, I will hand it over to Salome. Salome, correct me if I'm wrong, but la parole est à toi. Bye.
Merci Ali. Hello everyone. So right now on the French market, so I am Salome Durand, head of solar PV for the French Trade Renewable Association. So as Jonathan already mentioned it, French solar market, as you already know, is under pressure. 2024 broke records with 5 gigawatts added, but the landscape is shifting in 2025. Political instability and evolving regulatory and economic frameworks are introducing complexities that could influence the trajectory of all the industry. In 2025, we have to carefully navigate to ensure a minimum of stability. So 2024 in few data plus 5 gigawatts added, that is to say 1 million installation now operational, which is a great year, strongly boosted by the 100 to 500 kilowatts segment, that is to say the CNI roofs. In 2025, so far, we added 2.7 gigawatts of new PV capacity. The market is basically composed by 3 segments. The first one is medium roofs from 100 to 500 kilowatt peak, which has led the dynamic so far thanks to the feed-in tariff. A feed-in tariff that will end by September, as it will be replaced by a tender with a target volume. We'll talk about it later. In this segment, we observe a slight decline for the first time in 5 years, with a connected volume of almost 600 megawatts during Q2 versus almost 700 megawatts connected during Q1 2025. The evolution of this segment in the coming quarters will be very important given the significant regulatory changes currently underway. The second one is large PV plants over 500 kilowatts. We have here a slight increase in Q2 2025, but still not really significant. In fact, this growth is driven by projects awarded in the initial tender Creux 4 dating from 2015 and delays linked to the COVID and inflation crisis. And the last one is residential. Here we have a significant slowdown with a decline of almost 40% compared to last year. This decline that we are beginning to see in the main segments is partly due to the fact that the market is indeed navigated by sight with no clear roadmap for the next 10 years. France, as you may know, is 2 years behind on its energy strategy called Multi-Annual Energy Planning, or PPE, Programmation Pluriannuelle de l'Énergie. And this creates a big instability because this document gives a framework for the public support in a market still mostly driven by public tenders. And of course, we as a federation, we are very mobilized. We called so many times for immediate publication. On the right of the slide, you can see an example of an open letter signed by around 20 associations, including the SER. And sadly, with each new working paper published, the PV development targets are reduced from 54 gigawatts in the public consultation last spring to 48 gigawatts in 2030 in a leaked press release in July. And in the same time, the targets for 2035 are also reduced from 65 to 90 gigawatts to 55 to 80 gigawatts right now. But why all these delays? In the past months, two reasons can be mentioned. The first reason is a procedure clash. Indeed, the MPs from the parliament wanted a national energy debate on this roadmap throughout a law proposal before the publication of the decree. But there were some hesitation within the government on the procedure. Some wanted to publish the decree before the end of the parliamentary debate. For instance, the industry minister Marc Ferracci pushed for summer promulgation of the roadmap by decree, but it was blocked at the last minute by the Prime Minister at the beginning of August. The second reason is on the balance between nuclear energy and renewables. And to illustrate this point, we even barely avoided a ban on solar at the start of summer. And thanks to a huge mobilization, we avoided it. And on the right side of the slide, you can see the result of the vote in the National Assembly. And on the left side of the slide, you can see an example of a press release in which the Minister of the Interior calls for the end of funding for renewable energy. And right now, the Prime Minister seems to wait for the end of legislative work to publish the roadmap. And at the same time, the proposal law has been scheduled for a second reading in mid-September. So in theory, we have to wait for the end of September for the publication. But because all of this was too simple, yesterday afternoon, the Prime Minister announced that he would seek a vote of confidence in the National Assembly on September the 8th to win support for the budget cutting plan for 2026. Since this announcement, and without any surprises, many MPs groups have already announced that they will vote against this vote of confidence. So the future of the government is very much at stake right now, and so is the publication of the energy roadmap. On an economic level, renewables, and especially solar, is perceived by the government as too expensive and contributing to the deficit. So the government decided to put it down this year. Two examples of this reduction. Firstly, on the main driver of this dynamic, the CNI segment, or the 100 to 500 kilowatt segment, as we mentioned it on the slide. This segment is used to be driven by a feed-in tariff, but the government wanted to have a better control on the dynamic. So this segment will by September be driven by a tender with a target volume. But the targeted volume is drastically reduced compared to the volumes generated with the feed-in tariff, and will be, in fact, divided by 4. The second example is on the residential segment. The government also wanted to transform here the public support. The purchase price has been significantly reduced, but in return, a reduced taxes rate of 5.5% should be applied to all installation. And we are, in fact, waiting for a decree that must set out the precise conditions for the tax reduced. And finally, there is more than ever a huge advocacy for regulatory consistency. Here there is a few examples of regulatory conflicts we observed during the last months. Firstly, on solar obligation. Here there have been some attempts to challenge the solarizations obligations introduced by the Acceleration Act published in 2023. On agri-PV, we have a few discussions with ADEME, or the French Agency for the Ecological Transition, on the opportunity to precise the regulatory framework, and we estimated as a federation that it will not be super useful, considering that it must add complexity for developers instead of simplify the development of those projects. And on ground-mounted PV, the Acceleration Act from 2023 set a new framework for the development of those projects, which is more restrictive than before. And in fact, each department is setting a list of eligible plots for those installations, but there is some differences in the interpretations of the methodology. So we made some recommendation to the administration to clarify the framework. And to sum up, long-term clarity is urgently missing, and despite this very volatile moment, the main priorities for the SER remain keeping development steady across all the segments, tackling the challenges of system flexibility, and finally ensuring the future of France's industrial landscape, as you may know, with the two projects of Gigafactory in the French territory. So that's it for France. Thanks for your attention. And I will give the floor to Jan, director of the Czech Solar Association.
Thank you, Salome. Hi, everybody from me. My presentation on the Czech market will be maybe somewhat simple because the Czech market is a bit simpler compared to, let's say, Germany or France even. So let's get into it. We have seen quite a lot of growth over the past years, of course, beginning with the energy crisis following the war in Ukraine, and have joined the gigawatt market in 2023 and 2024. And Czechia too has seen some significant slowdown of the solar markets, but I think we went a bit further than other countries because it's not only that we've seen a slowdown in growth, but we've actually seen negative growth in the first half year of 2025, where we installed 357 megawatt peak DC. So we are currently aiming to not meet the 1 gigawatt again, but as we've seen before, the second half of the year might surprise us as well. The reason why that is, we've seen, first of all, a drop down of a significant slowdown in the residential segments, which has been to some extent picked up by the C&I segment, which means that the average size of solar power plant is growing in Czechia. A couple of years ago, it was around 7, 8, 10 kilowatts because we were building mostly residentials, and now the average size is already at 27.5 kilowatt peak. Again, increasing because we're seeing more large solar power plants being built, or medium-sized and large solar power plants are being built. What we've seen is a significant decrease in the number of projects, again, partially because the baton is being passed on from the residential segment to the C&I segment, but also because of the crash of the residential segments. So if we look at the specific segments now, we've seen, as I mentioned, unfortunately quite dramatic slowdown in the residential segment, which has halved almost. For several reasons. First of all, the state has cut subsidies for renewable energy on family homes by 50%. This was because Czechia, I think, several years ago made a not very fortunate decision to shift the allocation for residential subsidies from the state budget, from CO2 certificates that went into the state budgets to the modernization fund. So sometimes you hear Czech politicians boasting about how Czechia is number one in actually using money from the modernization fund. But that is mostly due to the fact that we are using money from the modernization fund, which originally was supposed to drive decarbonization on a large scale in large industries and carbon-heavy industries. We use that money now to build residential solar. So it's been quite a significant part of share of the modernization fund spent on residential solar, which means that there's big political pressure to cut it. So the Ministry of Environment has cut subsidies by 50%, which in turn has led to a massive slowdown. Also, of course, in combination with lower energy prices, the energy crisis seemingly from people is over, even though we are warning that it might return at any point. And this, of course, has led to a big problem or big phenomenon in the market, with a lot of installers crashing. The market is consolidating. Companies that, for example, were investing in solar or expanding their portfolio, their horizons, are withdrawing again. We've unfortunately seen some installers that had been around for years crashing because of lack of demand from residentials, and not every installer is now successful in the shift from the residential segment to the C&I segment. We are, of course, lobbying for a continuation of subsidies for residential, which has been driving the Czech market for many years, in terms of lower VAT, transferring subsidies back to the state budget. But we have elections in the autumn, so we'll see which direction we'll be heading in. Interestingly, Czechia, like a lot of Central and Eastern European countries, has a lot of residential buildings from communist times that theoretically would be a huge source or huge potential for solar energy growth. But of course, we're running into problems with having to deal with dozens of households, dozens of parties. And that big segment has still not been unlocked. Hopefully, this energy sharing in communities will help, but we've only had energy communities now for a year, so it's quite too early to tell whether somebody will be managed to unlock this huge potential market. In terms of C&I, we've seen two unforeseen problems. We've seen a slowdown, but in this segment too. But it has to be said that we've seen problems with building permits being issued, because there was a problem with the digitalization of the entire building permit agenda. The government software system has crashed, not functioned. At the same time, a subsidy program, which was administered by the Czech National Bank for Development, has also ran into problems on the software side, on the subsidy application side. So we're hoping that a backlog of projects that was not built this year, or maybe in the first half, will be built in the second half of this year, because there is still a lot of potential for C&I, and companies are viewing projects more in the more long term than for example, households and families. We've not really seen many on-site PPA projects. That is because Czechia has CapEx subsidies available, and the thinking of companies is, well, if there are subsidies available, then I want the subsidies, instead of looking, maybe that's a on-site PPA or direct wire PPA might be a more beneficial option. And also, we don't really have experienced companies on the Czech PPA markets, and we are now discussing with several companies from abroad on entering the Czech market. A lot of problems are being still identified by us in the utility scale market. We have seen very few projects built still, even though there is a big pipeline of projects. This has been down to, again, lower energy prices having a huge impact, a negative impact on the economics of projects. We don't have any auctions in Czechia. We have a CapEx subsidy, which is around 15%. So essentially, the Czech market is trying to build solar without subsidies. A lot of projects are now being built with batteries. So those that were, for example, developed without batteries are having to rethink their strategy. We have a lot of problems with permitting and zoning, sadly, when regional building offices are trying to stall and block projects, and there is very little political pressure on the regional and local building offices to actually have a positive and proactive approach to renewables. Politicians very often talk about the need for renewable energy, but when it then comes to standing up or saying out loud that this means that we will have to build solar and wind parks, it's a different affair. Also, sadly, we've seen a almost 1-year conflict with the Ministry of Finance and the government about cutting feed-in tariffs for existing power plants from 2010, which would have, in our estimation, really been detrimental for about 75% of new projects, because it would have really destabilized the entire economy in terms of solar energy, renewable energy, and financing. That for now is over, and we're hoping that the government will actually just let the companies build their projects that they've invested money in. If we look at the capacity total, we have now about just a little under 5 gigawatt built in Czechia, which, if you compare it to the outlook in the National Climate Plan, We are still below the target for the National Climate Plan, which is around 10 gigawatt by 2030, because we're not seeing these large-scale solar power plants being built. So we are really lobbying and pushing through on all levels, ministries and all that, for quicker permitting, better permitting. We've sadly seen the introduction of a law on acceleration zones, which in our opinion will not work. And it was mainly passed just to tick a list in the implementation list of implementations, and we're not really optimistic in terms of what that will bring. And just maybe summing up, Salome mentioned the need for stability. In Czechia, we need stability and a little bit more vision, because we have this potential still available. We're an energy-intensive industry that theoretically needs a lot of energy, with coal power plants that are being planned to shut down. But we're not really seeing the political drive to actually, do what is really necessary to get over the line in terms of the climate plan for 2030. That's all from me. I hope you have questions about Czechia. If not, I will hand over the floor to the colleagues from Solar Power Europe.
Thanks, Jan. Great presentation. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. Maybe one from my side. I think we have only 3 minutes left anyway, so the presentations were quite exhaustive and informative. But maybe from my side, so to the audience, which is mostly market intelligence analysts from our members. So what would you, so in summary, consider actually the most important thing to watch out for to assess market growth, let's say in the coming year or so? I think things can change. So, but what's key to look out for at the moment? So maybe Salome for France, Jan for Czech, Arthur policy-wise for Solar Power Europe, and Ali maybe overall finally as a consultant. Maybe Salome, you first.
Yes, I think the main big deal for France right now it's stability, regulatory stability in terms of economic support, for instance. But I think the evolutions of public support will make the developers have a better look at, for instance, the CPPA, as my colleagues already mentioned it, or at the storage as well, to address the flexibility subject as well.
Okay, thanks. Jan?
Yeah, I think in Czechia, if I had to sum it up, storage is a huge question, because we are now seeing the rollout of standalone batteries in Czechia. There's huge interest in flexibility as well, which should hopefully help with energy prices, negative energy pricing, which in turn will improve the economics of ground mount solar and even residential and commercial, because of negative energy prices that have also slowed down the residential market. And the other thing is just basically a political will to actually build solar energy, because even if it's about money, there are other options on how to support solar energy. If we can't get auctions in Czechia, then we're talking for example, about state guarantees for loans for PPA projects and things like this. But it's about actually showing that the government wants solar to be built and is willing to discuss alternative routes.
Okay, thanks. Arthur?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. The two things I would say we're looking forward to is, I mean, we've made this here at Solar Power Europe about flexibility, so integrating solar in a market where there's more and more negative prices and grid congestion. So we have to see what the Commission really does about this, more than recommendations, but actually actions, maybe through actions for grid and electrification directly. The second thing is the opportunity to influence and steer the legislative process on the energy security framework of the EU. I mean, rightfully so, the EU Commission is looking to change that a bit, moving from simply gas storage targets to maybe recognizing that renewables can be the system you base your system on. and it is safe, it is secure, and you can use renewables along with electrification and storage for the services that fossil plants were giving you before. So this is a couple of moves and trends that we're seeing in
Okay,
Brussels.
thanks. Maybe Ali?
Yeah, Michael, I think what we are doing here at UPD is also trying to work with the installers to smoothen up their CNI installations, to basically teach them and work with them to, first of all, diversify their portfolios and also their segments. And this is what we are doing in order to facilitate the CNI installation. And I think this, as we discussed in the session, CNI, of course, utility is important, and we are working in that direction.
Okay, thanks. Maybe Jonathan, finally, you showed an interesting slide from our medium year report where you said, basically assuming that market won't grow over the next few years, we won't meet the 750 gigawatt target, actually 2030. But I don't know, this is assuming there is no growth. In our EMO, which we published in December, we extrapolated that still to roughly 8 or almost 800 gigawatts. So there we would meet it. But from what you're seeing right now, actually, where would you see us now, on which road, actually, between this this roughly 800 and not meeting it by 723 or so?
So I think if you would split it up between utility scale and distributed solar, utility scale is driving forward, and we have strong auctions still. Okay, some of them are being less subscribed to, as in France, for example, but strong auctions still from the past and from recent events that will push utility scales forward to remain leading market growth, basically. The distributed segment is the one that slows down the fastest, but also the one that can regain momentum the fastest. So I depending on this segment, basically, and how well we retain both support and auctions for the utility scale segment, but depending on this distributed solar segment, depending on how businesses address the needs of residencies and the needs of other businesses, how accessible they make it to this vast majority that still is on the fence of a large solar investment, and how well adopted these full solutions will become with batteries, with EVs, with energy management systems. Depending on that, you can get closer and maybe even go over this REPowerEU target. So I think the main takeaway from this report is then also look at how quickly the distributed segment went down, how reactive it was to events, to changing market dynamics, but also look at how quickly you can regain their confidence with the right tools. So let's see what we post in our European market outlook towards the end of the year. But I'm confident there is for sure some high scenario that still touches and exceeds this target. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. So dear attendees, stay tuned. That's the message, and you hear from us more in the future. I wanted to mention one thing, and then let me just see if I can move that forward, or Gary, can we just, yeah, next slide, please. Oops. Yeah, next one. Yeah, so I just wanted to refer to our Rooftop Reconnect networking event. So again, summer holidays are basically more or less over, and we are organizing, as we've done also in recent years, a networking event in Brussels. It's a rooftop party. We will have politicians, members from Parliament, Commission, speaking, and but it's mostly about really networking. So if you have actually further questions, all of the people here, or most of the people, at least from our side, will be there, but also a lot of associations will be there, national associations. So you are invited to join. But if you want to, please sign up soon. There is a huge demand, and we might actually close registration soon. So thanks again for joining us, and looking forward to keep in touch. Thanks to everyone. Have a nice afternoon. Ciao.